There's a certain heaviness that arrives without warning, a weight that's less about the body and more about the soul. It seeps in during the quiet hours, in the stillness between one task and the next, in those moments when the world expects you to be fine, but you know you're anything but. It doesn't always announce itself with tears or loud grief. Sometimes it comes with numbness, with disconnection, with that empty gaze staring at a wall for too long. And you wonder silently when it started to feel like you were drifting away from your own life. You don't talk about it much, this kind of pain. It feels too complicated to explain, too hidden beneath layers of functioning. You show up, you get things done, you smile when you need to. But inside, it's a different story. Inside, there's a quiet ache, a question that keeps circling back. Is this all there is? You're not broken. You know that. You're still standing, still trying. But there's a disconnect, a distance between the person you show the world and the one curled up inside, asking for a deeper kind of presence. You begin to feel like you're on autopilot, doing what's expected, saying the right things, meeting deadlines, keeping it all together. But it's hollow, it's rehearsed. You can't remember the last time you felt truly alive, not just entertained, not just distracted, alive, present, awake. There's a version of you buried somewhere under the exhaustion, the self-sacrifice, the daily performance, and that version of you is calling out, not with anger, but with longing, with a gentle ache that says, "Come back." And so slowly, you begin to listen. You stop filling every silence with sound. You pause before responding. You take an extra breath before making a decision. You begin to notice the places where you've been living on default, where you've been making choices to avoid discomfort instead of stepping into your truth. You catch yourself in the mirror, not to criticize your reflection, but to ask, who am I now? And the answer doesn't come right away. But the question opens something, a doorway, a path inward. You begin walking it, unsure of where it leads, but certain you can't stay where you are. The path isn't linear. Some days you feel like you're making progress. Others like you're sinking deeper into confusion. But there's a difference now. You're not pretending anymore. You're not numbing every uncomfortable thought. You're not pushing away your sadness with distractions. You're feeling it, sitting with it, allowing it to rise. And in that honesty, something begins to soften. You cry one night, not because something tragic happened, but because something real finally touched you. Maybe it was a song, a line in a book, a memory that surfaced without warning, and the tears come, not as a breakdown, but as a release, a washing away of the numbness, a crack in the wall that's been holding everything in. And after the crying, there's a silence, not empty, but sacred, like your soul is saying, "Thank you for not turning away." You realize how long it's been since you truly checked in with yourself. Not your schedule, not your goals, but your soul. How long you've been performing versions of yourself to meet expectations you never agreed to. How many times you've said yes when your body screamed no. How many smiles were offered out of habit, not happiness. And you don't judge yourself for it. You understand now it was survival. You did what you needed to get through. But survival is not the same as living, and you're ready for more. You start creating little moments of honesty. You journal not for productivity, but for truth. You go on walks without your phone. You stare at the sky and feel awe again. You listen to music that makes you feel something. And in these moments, you begin to reclaim pieces of yourself. Not with grand declarations, but with quiet courage. You're not trying to be someone new. You're just trying to remember who you were before the noise drowned everything out. You start setting boundaries, not just with others, but with yourself. You stop letting guilt make your choices. You stop staying in conversations that drain you. You stop trying to fix people who don't want to grow. You begin to realize that protecting your energy is not selfish. It's sacred. And as you pull back from the people and patterns that once defined you, you start to feel space. Space to breathe. Space to feel. Space to be. It's not easy. There are days when you want to go back, when the old patterns feel safe, when silence feels threatening again, when presence feels too painful. But you keep going, not because it's easy, but because you've tasted something real, something raw, something that feels like truth. And once you taste truth, no performance will ever satisfy you again. You begin to treat your inner world with more care. You notice the voice in your head, the critic, the doubter, the scared child. And instead of silencing it, you listen. You ask, what do you need right now? And sometimes the answer is rest. Sometimes it's reassurance. Sometimes it's just to be heard. You stop fighting yourself. You start building trust. One gentle conversation at a time. You remember moments from your childhood, times you felt wonder, curiosity, presence. And you ask, where did that version of me go? The answer is simple. They're still here, just buried beneath years of pretending, of enduring, of forgetting. And so you invite them back. You find joy in small things. You laugh without filtering. You daydream without guilt. You let life touch you again without needing it to be productive. And maybe one day you wake up and feel different. Not fixed, not perfect, but present, awake. You sip your coffee slowly. You notice the warmth on your lips, the way your breath feels deeper. You step outside and feel the wind on your skin, and you realize you're here, not just surviving, not just getting through, but living. And it's beautiful, not because it's easy, but because it's real. You begin to reimagine success. It's no longer about how much you achieve, but about how deeply you feel, how honestly you live, how gently you speak to yourself, how bravely you show up. You stop measuring your worth in output. You start measuring it in alignment. You know now that a quiet day can be a victory, that rest can be sacred, that saying no can be the most loving act. You don't need the world to understand. You don't need a stage. You just need to know deep in your bones that you are living from a place of truth, and that knowing becomes your compass, your anchor, your North Star. You're not becoming someone new, you're returning. And in that return, you find everything you thought was missing. There is a moment in every inner journey where the silence becomes louder than anything else. Not the kind of silence that feels empty or alone, but a stillness that invites you to finally hear what you've been avoiding. It begins to speak to you, not in full sentences, not in declarations, but in subtle nudges, in fragments of memory, in the soft ache behind your ribs. And in that quiet, something inside you whispers, this is where we begin. You don't need dramatic changes to feel reborn. It happens in whispers, in the breath you take before reacting, in the decision to rest instead of push, in the sacred moment you choose to say no, not because you're angry, but because you finally remembered you're allowed to. This quiet rebirth isn't loud. It isn't celebrated. It isn't even noticed by most. But you feel it in the space between your thoughts, in the slow, deliberate way you begin to treat yourself. It's a soft revolution, one that begins within. You begin to recognize the places where you've been leaking energy, the relationships that constantly require you to explain yourself, the habits that soothe your fear but suffocate your growth, the way you twist your truth to make others comfortable, and the realization stings. Because you remember how long you tolerated what hurt, how often you betrayed your intuition in the name of peace. But you don't blame yourself anymore. You thank yourself. Because even then you were doing your best. Even then you were surviving, and survival deserves reverence. Your body starts to feel like a place worth listening to. You stop dismissing the tension in your chest, the pit in your stomach, the ache in your shoulders. You no longer see your physical symptoms as inconveniences. You see them as messages, as wise signals from a body that's been begging to be heard. You sit with it. You ask, "What are you trying to tell me?" And you learn to honor the answer, even when it's inconvenient, even when it asks you to change what you thought was unchangeable. There's a beauty in realizing that healing doesn't always look like light. Sometimes it looks like darkness, but not the kind that swallows you, the kind that holds you, that wraps around you like a weighted blanket, that gives you permission to fall apart so you can piece yourself back together with intention. You stop fearing the dark corners of your heart. You sit in them. You light a candle inside them. You start to believe that nothing within you is too broken to be met with love. And that love begins with you. Not as a concept, not as a post-it note on the mirror, but as a lived experience. You speak to yourself with softness. You meet your flaws with forgiveness. You no longer punish yourself for being human. You see now that every messy part of you is worthy, that the tender parts, the afraid parts, the unsure parts, they're not liabilities. They are invitations. Invitations to love yourself more deeply than you ever have before. You notice the stories you've inherited, the ones that told you you had to earn rest, that you had to be productive to be loved, that emotions were dangerous, that asking for help meant weakness, and you start to question them. You begin to ask, "Is this mine?" And if the answer is no, you let it go. Gently, without shame, like laying down a heavy coat you didn't realize you were still wearing. You start to rebuild your inner home, not all at once, not in dramatic redesigns, but in small, sacred ways. You light a candle when you write. You listen to music that feels like medicine. You clean not because you have to, but because a clear space feels like a clear mind. You create corners of safety, of beauty, of truth. And little by little, you feel yourself arriving, not to a destination, but to yourself. You begin to grieve, not just people, but versions of yourself. The you that stayed silent to keep the peace. The you that overextended to be liked. The you that didn't know boundaries were allowed. And it hurts, because even those versions were trying to help you survive. But you let them go anyway. You thank them for their service, and you release them so that you can rise. You notice how your voice starts to change. Not just the words, but the energy behind them. You speak slower, with more intention. You say what you mean, even when your voice shakes. You no longer dress your truth in politeness to avoid conflict. You let your truth be enough. You let your needs be seen. You let your boundaries be known, not as punishment, but as clarity, as love. You don't explain as much. You don't over-apologize. You don't shrink your decisions for someone else's comfort. You realize now that people's reactions to your truth are not your responsibility, that you are not responsible for how others carry their own unhealed wounds, that your job is not to make yourself small so others feel big. Your job is to be you, fully, freely, unapologetically. You begin to reconnect with your inner child, not as a memory, but as a living presence. You remember what used to bring you joy, the way you used to draw without caring if it was good, the way you'd dance without mirrors, the way you'd talk to the moon and believe it listened. And you invite that wonder back in. You create without critique. You play without purpose. You let yourself be silly, soft, curious, because you're not here just to survive. You're here to feel alive. And slowly you begin to realize that you're changing. Not in the ways others might see, but in the way you carry yourself, the way you breathe, the way you no longer rush to fill silence, the way you hold your own hand through hard moments. You're no longer waiting for someone to come rescue you. You've become your own sanctuary, your own soft place to land, your own steady ground. You stop needing every part of your life to be explained. You don't have to know why everything happened the way it did. You don't have to make sense of every loss, every ending, every ache. Sometimes you just hold it. You let it be what it is. You allow yourself to not know. And in that surrender, you find peace. Not the kind that comes from having answers, but the kind that comes from letting go of the need for them. You begin to feel more connected. To yourself, yes, but also to life. You notice the way the wind moves through the trees, the way the light changes in a room depending on the time of day. You listen more, not to reply, but to understand. You walk slower, you breathe deeper. You don't need to rush. You're not missing anything. You're here. And being here is the miracle. You start building a life that feels like a reflection, not a performance. One that aligns with your truth, one that holds space for your humanity, one that honors your energy. You let go of shoulds, of timelines, of expectations that never belong to you, and you replace them with intention, with choice, with presence. You're no longer living someone else's story. You're writing your own. And every day, even on the hard ones, you remind yourself, I am allowed to be exactly where I am. I am allowed to change my mind. I am allowed to grow slowly. I am allowed to take up space. I am allowed to begin again. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is choose to stay soft in a world that keeps trying to harden you. To keep your heart open when it would be easier to shut it down. To remain gentle when bitterness tempts you like a shield. You've seen what it feels like to carry armor every day. To walk through life prepared to fight, to defend, to run. But now you know there is a different kind of strength. The kind that allows you to stand unguarded, trusting your own intuition to protect you without closing your heart off from connection. You've started to become the person who breathes through discomfort instead of reacting to it. The one who pauses when the old patterns rise, who hears the old thoughts, I'm not enough. They're going to leave. I must prove my worth. And instead of believing them, you hold them. Like a child asking for comfort, you don't scold those thoughts anymore. You don't shame yourself for feeling fragile. You simply breathe and say, I hear you, but we're safe now. And in that softness, you become your own source of stability. You begin to understand that you were never meant to carry so much, that your worth was never meant to be built on your ability to endure. That strength doesn't mean silence, and love doesn't mean self-sacrifice. You feel it now, deep in your bones, that your softness is not a weakness. It is a sign of life, of aliveness, of the courage it takes to remain open to joy, to connection, to tenderness, even after all you've been through. You remember moments when you chose silence over truth, when you betrayed your own boundaries to keep someone close, when you ignored your intuition because the risk of being alone felt greater than the pain of staying, and instead of resenting yourself for those choices, you thank yourself. You were doing the best you could with the tools you had. You were surviving. And even in your confusion, there was a fierce kind of love guiding you, an unshakable belief that you were worthy of belonging, even if you didn't yet know how to find it in the right places. Now you look for that belonging within. You stop waiting for someone else to tell you who you are. You begin to see yourself with clearer eyes. You no longer chase validation. You no longer mold yourself to be more likable, more pleasing, more acceptable. You start to say things like, this is what I need, or this doesn't work for me anymore. And those words don't feel dangerous anymore. They feel like truth, like liberation, like home. You realize that your softness can hold firm boundaries, that you can be kind and still say no, that you can be loving and still walk away, that your tenderness is not an invitation for disrespect. It is a sign that you value yourself enough to live in integrity, even when it's hard. And with every boundary you hold, with every moment you choose yourself, your nervous system starts to trust you. Your body begins to feel safer. Your soul begins to settle. It doesn't mean the work is done. The old thoughts still visit. The old patterns still whisper. But now you don't act on them. You notice them. You breathe through them. You thank them for what they taught you, and then you choose differently. Not because you have to, but because you want to. Because you're building something different now, a life that reflects who you are, not who you had to be to survive. You begin to see healing not as an endpoint, but as a way of moving through the world, a way of meeting yourself with compassion, a way of showing up to your own life with curiosity instead of judgment. You stop asking, when will I be healed? And start asking, how can I be more present with what's here? Because you understand now that being present is the gateway to peace, to joy, to connection, to wholeness. You start letting yourself feel pleasure again, not just in the big ways, but in the small ones. The warmth of a blanket pulled up over tired legs, the sound of a favorite song in a quiet room, the first sip of coffee, the softness of clean sheets. These small, holy moments remind you that life isn't found in peak experiences. It's found in presence, and your ability to receive joy becomes a radical act, a declaration that you are no longer waiting to be worthy. You no longer numb through constant doing. You stop filling every hour. You stop measuring your value in how much you produce. You give yourself permission to rest without earning it. You rest because you're alive, because you're tired, because you're human. And you begin to notice something beautiful. In that rest, creativity returns. Inspiration finds you. Joy knocks at your door. Not because you chased it, but because you made space for it. You begin to speak to yourself like someone you're learning to trust. You don't rush the process. You allow uncertainty. You stop criticizing every mistake. You say things like, I'm proud of you for trying, or it's okay to rest today. And those words, said quietly, begin to rewrite the story you've lived in for years. You stop being the villain in your own mind. You become the guide, the witness, the presence that never leaves. And in that presence, something inside you changes. Not in an instant, but slowly. You laugh more, you worry less. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head that you'll never have. You stop needing to be 5 steps ahead. You begin to trust that you can handle whatever comes, that you don't need to know everything to be okay, that you don't need to be perfect to be at peace. You remember the version of you that once thought peace was something you had to earn? You remember how you tried to be good, to be helpful, to be invisible, just to feel safe. And now you gather that version of you in your arms. You whisper, you don't have to do that anymore. You let them rest. You let them soften. You stop apologizing for your needs. You stop over-explaining your boundaries. You stop offering disclaimers before every truth. You don't need to soften your edges for others to feel comfortable. You don't need to perform humility to prove you're kind. You simply are, and your presence speaks for itself. You know now that authenticity is enough, that your energy is your introduction, that what you radiate matters more than what you say. You become a little quieter, not because you have nothing to say, but because you're no longer trying to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. You save your sacred words for the ones who know how to hold them. You choose peace over performance, depth over drama, intimacy over interaction. Your circle becomes smaller, but your connections grow deeper, and that feels like freedom. You see how much time you once spent trying to fix others, to rescue, to be the one who always held space, even when your own heart was breaking. You begin to pull that energy back, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. You understand now, holding space for someone else shouldn't come at the cost of abandoning yourself. You can love deeply and still say, this doesn't work for me. You can be kind and still walk away. You can be compassionate and still prioritize your peace. You notice how your relationship with pain has evolved. You don't resist it like you used to. You don't immediately search for distraction. You let it come. You let it speak. You ask what it needs. And sometimes all it needs is for you to be present, to stop fixing, to stop analyzing, just to sit, to breathe, to be with it like you would a friend in grief. And in that stillness, something shifts. Not the pain itself, but the way you carry it. With tenderness, with trust, with presence, you start to live in alignment with your values. Not the ones you inherited, but the ones you chose. You no longer betray your heart to stay in harmony with people who aren't walking your path. You stop watering dead plants. You stop romanticizing struggle. You stop calling chaos passion. You know better now, and you choose better. Not because you're perfect, but because you're paying attention. You find yourself looking at the sky more, sitting in silence more, saying thank you for no particular reason. You feel connected to something larger, not in a religious sense, but in a real one. You sense your place in the fabric of things, not above, not below, just part of it, a thread, a breath, a beating heart. And that connection, that quiet sense of being held by something unseen, becomes your refuge. You begin to release the pressure to have it all figured out. You stop waiting for the perfect plan, the clear answer, the ideal timing. You move with what you know, and you trust that the rest will reveal itself. You take the step that's in front of you. You let go of needing to see the whole staircase. And somehow in that letting go, you feel more held than you ever did when you were grasping for control. You no longer see your journey as something that needs to be impressive. You stop trying to inspire people with your pain. You just live, fully, honestly, softly. You let your life be a quiet testimony to what happens when you return to yourself. You don't need to shout. You don't need to perform. You simply embody. And that embodiment is more powerful than anything you could say. You start to trust joy again. Not the fleeting kind, but the rooted kind. The kind that lives in your breath, in your presence, in your choice to be here fully, even when it hurts. You no longer push joy away because you're afraid it won't last. You welcome it. You hold it lightly. You let it teach you how to live with your heart open, and you keep going, one breath at a time, one truth at a time, one small, holy moment at a time. There's a kind of beauty in learning to stay with yourself when no one else does. Not because people have left, but because you finally stopped leaving yourself. You notice how for years you abandoned your own heart just to make others feel at ease. You learned to read the room before you read your own feelings. You learned to anticipate what others might need before you even asked yourself what you needed. You told yourself this was love, that this was how to be kind. But now you see it for what it was, a deep forgetting of your own worth. And now as you remember, it all begins to shift. You stop walking into rooms trying to be small. You stop laughing at jokes that don't feel good in your gut. You stop giving people the best of you while giving yourself what's left. And when the old habits resurface, when your fingers hover over the message you don't really want to send, when your mouth forms the words, "It's fine," even when it's not, you pause, you take a breath. You ask yourself, is this true? Is this kind? Is this me? And slowly you choose differently. You begin to live from your own center, from your own alignment. You no longer check with others before checking with your own soul. You feel when something is off, not just in situations, but in your own response to them. You notice when you're performing, when you're people-pleasing, when you're wearing a mask. And instead of judging yourself for it, you soften. You say, "Oh, there you are. You're trying to be safe." And you sit with that part of yourself. You hold it. You don't exile it, because now you know every part of you just wants to be seen. The more you hold yourself this way, the less you demand from others. Not because you no longer desire connection, but because you've stopped expecting people to give you what you won't give yourself. You don't hand over your worth for others to affirm. You don't beg for love that has to be earned. You stop needing constant reassurance, not because you become cold, but because you become whole. You trust that your value isn't up for negotiation. It just is. You start to recognize love by how it feels in your body. Not butterflies, but calm. Not adrenaline, but peace. Not chaos, but clarity. You stop mistaking emotional roller coasters for passion. You no longer confuse inconsistency with intensity. You realize that the love that lasts is the one that feels like a soft place to land, not the one that leaves you questioning your worth every time you speak your truth. You don't chase anymore. You attract, and you attract differently now because you are different now. You give yourself permission to slow down, not just your actions, but your thoughts. You don't rush to conclusions. You don't spiral into assumptions. You wait. You observe. You ask more questions. You check in with your body. You don't need immediate answers. You trust the unfolding. You're not in a hurry to figure it all out. You know that presence matters more than perfection. That awareness is more valuable than control. You start seeing your triggers as doorways, each one pointing to a part of you that still feels unsafe, still feels unseen, still carries the imprint of a moment when love felt conditional. And instead of shutting the door, you open it. You say, "Come in, tell me your story." And the story might hurt. It might take you back to a place you thought you'd outgrown. But this time you stay. You don't numb, you don't run, you hold yourself through it, and you rewrite the ending. You begin to notice how your definition of success has changed. It's no longer about the title, the income, the followers, the applause. It's about how you feel when you wake up, how aligned you feel with your own values, how safe you feel inside your own skin. Success becomes presence, becomes integrity, becomes the ability to be fully here without needing the moment to be anything other than what it is. You stop chasing the next thing, the next goal, the next upgrade, the next breakthrough. You find satisfaction in the now, not because you've stopped dreaming, but because you're no longer using dreams to escape the present. You're building a life that feels good now, one breath at a time, one decision at a time, one small sacred moment at a time. You treat your joy like it matters. You don't dismiss it as frivolous. You make space for it. You seek it. You create it. You learn what lights you up, and you don't apologize for it. You dance in your kitchen. You make your space beautiful for no one but yourself. You take photos of things no one else notices. You let yourself laugh, loud and unfiltered and true, and you stop explaining why. Joy becomes your birthright again, not a prize for good behavior, but a part of your everyday breath. You also start grieving more openly, not just the losses others can see, but the invisible ones, the dreams that died quietly, the relationships that ended without closure, the time you can't get back. You let yourself mourn, not because you're broken, but because you're honest. You understand now that grief is not a detour from healing, it's a part of it, and you don't rush it. You let it move through you like a storm through the trees. And you trust that after, the air will feel clearer. You begin to love differently, not from scarcity, not from obligation, not from a place of trying to earn anything. You love with presence, with freedom, with boundaries. You love without losing yourself. You give without emptying yourself. You hold space without making yourself invisible. And the love that returns to you is different too. It meets you where you are. It nourishes rather than depletes. It grows in the sunlight of truth, not in the shadows of performance. You stop fighting the parts of you that still feel afraid. The fear doesn't mean you're not healing. It means you're human. It means you care. It means you've lived through things that taught you to be cautious. And now you teach those parts of you a new story. You show them what safety feels like. They begin to relax, bit by bit, breath by breath. You begin to see your healing reflected in the way you speak to others, in the patience you offer, in the empathy you extend, in the way you hold space without needing to fill it. You don't give advice when it's not asked for. You don't rescue people from their pain. You trust that everyone is on their own timeline, that the most powerful thing you can do is be a safe place, a mirror, a witness. You no longer pretend to be okay when you're not. You no longer minimize your struggles. You show up as you are, honestly, gently, unapologetically. And people feel that. They feel your realness, your groundedness, your wholeness. You don't have to say much. Your energy speaks for itself. And in your quiet way, you become the kind of person others feel safe around. Not because you're perfect, not because you have all the answers, but because you've learned how to sit with yourself, and in doing so, you've learned how to sit with others, without fixing, without judging, just being. And that beingness, it heals, it inspires, It reminds people that they too are enough. And so you keep going, not because you're chasing a finish line, but because this journey, this soft unfolding back into your own heart, it's become your home. There's a kind of liberation in learning that you don't need to rush your growth, that the blossoming of your soul doesn't have to happen on anyone's schedule but your own. You begin to see that there is no timeline for healing, no universal map that tells you where you should be by now. You stop measuring your progress in terms of how quickly you get over things. You start measuring it by how gently you're able to stay with yourself through all things. You remember when you thought healing would mean reaching a point where nothing hurt anymore, where everything made sense, where you'd become so wise and grounded that nothing could shake you. But now you know better. You know that healing isn't about becoming invincible. It's about becoming more human, more alive, more willing to feel the full range of what life brings without losing yourself in it. You still hurt, sometimes deeply, but you hurt with awareness, with softness, with grace. You begin to stop glorifying resilience and start honoring your softness. You see that being tough isn't always the goal, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is crumble for a while, to let yourself feel without rushing to fix it, to allow the tears without immediately looking for the lesson. You understand now that some wounds don't need explanations. They need space, they need tenderness, they need time, and so you give yourself time. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" When you feel low, you start asking, "What do I need right now?" You stop labeling your sadness as a setback. You begin to see it as a sign that something is stirring inside you, that something is asking to be seen, to be known, to be loved. You stop trying to snap out of it and instead ask, "Can I sit with this without abandoning myself?" You notice how often you used to seek distraction, your phone, your work, your conversations, anything to avoid the stillness. But now the stillness no longer terrifies you. You can sit in a quiet room with your thoughts and not feel like you're drowning. You can be alone without feeling lonely. You've started to see your own presence as enough, your own company as sacred. You stop needing to be around people to feel like you matter. You matter in the quiet too. And in that quiet, your creativity returns. Not always as a burst of inspiration, but as a slow trickle of ideas, of sensations, of possibilities. You start writing again, or painting, or speaking your truth in new ways. You don't do it to be seen or validated. You do it because your soul is ready to express itself, because you've made room, because you've created safety inside yourself, and in that safety, your essence begins to bloom. You don't expect others to understand this version of you right away. You know now that not everyone will get it. Some people loved you for who you used to be, the agreeable one, the dependable one, the one who never said no. And now as you shift, some will drift. Some will pull back. Some will criticize. But you don't take it personally. You know that their discomfort is not your responsibility. You are not changing to offend anyone. You are changing to honor yourself. You don't need to be the hero in anyone else's story anymore. You don't need to be the fixer, the savior, the one who holds everything together. You can just be you, fully, softly, truthfully, and that is enough. You stop proving your worth through how much you carry. You no longer wear exhaustion as a badge of honor. You rest, you say no, you delegate, you ask for help, and none of that makes you weak. It makes you wise. You begin to find pleasure in things you once rushed past. The smell of freshly washed clothes. You let them become part of your story, not the whole thing. You don't crave the noise like you used to. You don't fear the quiet. You don't need chaos to feel alive. You've learned how to find aliveness in stillness, in simplicity, in the ordinary miracle of waking up and choosing to be kind to yourself for one more day. And that truly is where the healing lives, not in dramatic changes, but in those small, repeated choices to honor your truth. You begin to believe in yourself again, not because of what you've achieved, but because of what you've survived, because of how you kept going, because of how you kept your heart open, because of how you chose to heal, even when no one clapped for it, even when no one saw, even when it was messy and hard and slow. That kind of courage is rare, and it is yours. You stop asking others to hold what only you can carry. You learn to tend to your own garden, to water your own roots, to plant joy where fear used to grow. You don't need to be everything to everyone anymore. You just need to be someone you trust, someone you love, someone you come home to. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not becoming someone new, but coming home again and again and again. There's a moment, subtle and often unnoticed, when you realize that you're no longer living from your past. It's not loud or dramatic. It doesn't arrive like a lightning bolt or a breakthrough. It comes softly in a conversation where you no longer feel the need to defend your worth. In a decision that once would have triggered self-doubt, now made with calm conviction. In the way you don't explain yourself anymore, not out of pride, but because you finally understand that your truth needs no validation. You begin to feel safe in your own presence. The constant checking in with others. Was I too much? Did I say the wrong thing? Do they still like me? Starts to fade. You trust your intentions now. You know your heart. You no longer abandon yourself just to be accepted. You see that peace isn't found in being liked by everyone. Peace is found in being able to sit with yourself and know you didn't betray your soul. This kind of inner safety is built slowly, brick by brick, boundary by boundary, truth by truth. It doesn't come from a perfect morning routine or a stack of self-help books. It comes from the quiet moments when you catch yourself slipping into old patterns and choose a new response. When you notice that you're about to silence yourself and instead, you speak. When you feel the fear rising and instead of pushing it down, you hold it with gentle hands and say, I'm not going to abandon you this time. You start to understand that your triggers are not enemies. They are teachers. They show you where the wound lives, where the healing is still unfolding. And instead of reacting with shame or defensiveness, you start getting curious. What is this trying to tell me? Where did I learn to be afraid of this? What am I believing in this moment that isn't true? These questions don't provide instant answers, but they open a space. And in that space, you breathe. You listen, you heal. You become less impressed by loudness and more drawn to depth. You don't chase the person who knows all the right words anymore. You look for the ones who live with integrity, who carry their truth in quiet ways. The people who don't perform compassion, but practice it. Who don't wear vulnerability like a trend, but as a way of being. You find yourself craving realness, not perfection. Honesty, not eloquence. Safety, not excitement. And you begin to notice how your energy changes around people. Some conversations leave you feeling expanded, like your soul can stretch out its arms. Others leave you shrinking, doubting, second-guessing. You stop ignoring that feeling. You stop telling yourself you're being too sensitive. You realize now your body is wise. It knows who feels like home and who doesn't. And you begin to act on that knowing. Not with anger, but with clarity. There's less chaos in your mind. Not because life is easier, but because you no longer believe every thought that arises. You've created space between stimulus and response. When anxiety knocks, you don't throw the door open in panic. You pause, you ask, is this true? Is this mine? Do I need to carry this? And more often now you realize you don't. You can acknowledge the fear without feeding it. You can witness the thought without letting it take over your day. This is self-mastery, not control, but awareness. You begin to live more rhythmically. You follow your natural cycles. You notice when your energy is low and honor it. You no longer force yourself to produce when your body is asking to pause. You allow space for integration, for rest, for doing nothing, not as laziness, but as medicine. And in that rest, you find creativity again. You find joy again. You find yourself again.